The SERAPIS CIPER, In the Shadow of John the Baptist, Episode 2, Threads of Betrayal. By the time dawn broke, word of the so-called John the Baptist betrayal scroll had spread far beyond the academic circuit. News outlets worldwide ran headlines like, "Newly discovered scroll claims John the Baptist rivaled Jesus, and ancient manuscript sparks global debate on Christian origins." Miriam's phone and email inbox overflowed with requests for interviews. The secure line Father Benedict used for Vatican communications pinged incessantly. Everyone wanted answers. Miriam and Benedict rose early to strategize with Dr. Abbott. The past 24 hours had left them on edge, especially with the possible infiltration by outside groups. Father Benedict spoke first over a hurried breakfast of eggs and tea. "Let's release a short statement," he said, stirring his cup anxiously. "One that neither confirms nor denies the scroll's authenticity. We can't afford to let the rumor mill spin out of control. At the same time, we must not prematurely validate the text." Dr. Aboud nodded. "Transparency is key. We say we've discovered a parchment, that it's under study, and that final results are pending. No mention of its contents." Miriam exhaled slowly. "I agree. Let's keep the theological angle ambiguous. The last thing we need is a mob claiming we're hiding or suppressing the truth." Within the hour, they drafted a concise statement. "A potentially ancient manuscript fragment has been discovered in the Judean desert. We are conducting scientific tests, including carbon dating and ink analysis, to verify its authenticity. At this time, no definitive conclusions can be drawn, and the researchers urge patience while investigations are ongoing." They sent it to the major outlets, posted it on official archaeology forums, and hoped it might quell the frenzy. But the internet was unstoppable. Armchair critics, conspiracy theorists, fervent believers, and devout skeptics were all fueling a conflagration of speculation. The Circle of Serapis, or those claiming affiliation with them, posted ominous messages online. "Prepare for the revelation. The false church will be exposed." Miriam rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of it all. She had never anticipated that a single find could spark such upheaval. Father Benedict, perhaps more accustomed to controversies within the church, remained stoic but not untroubled. Mid-morning, a black SUV pulled up to the outpost, raising a cloud of dust. Out stepped a tall figure in a tailored suit, a man in his early 50s, salt and pepper hair, and a measured smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He introduced himself as Cardinal Lorenzo Vieri from the Pontifical Commission for Historical Research. Father Benedict stiffened at the sight of him. Miriam sensed tension. Perhaps Benedict recognized Vieri from previous church controversies. Regardless, Father Benedict greeted him respectfully, though Miriam noticed the slight tremor in his voice. Vieri wasted no time. "I come on behalf of the Holy See," he declared, stepping inside. "The Church would like to assist in verifying the authenticity of the parchment, and if it is genuine, to ensure correct interpretation." His gaze lingered on Miriam, then shifted to Dr. Aboud. "We understand the need for cooperation between religious authorities and academic experts, but we must also protect our faithful from potential deceptions." Miriam tried to keep her expression neutral. "Of course, Cardinal. The more expertise, the better. We appreciate any assistance." Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the Cardinal's arrival represented an attempt to control the narrative. She also worried how he would respond if the text proved genuine. Throughout history, whenever sensational finds cast doubt on the official story, tensions flared between scholars and certain church factions. Benedict was usually a bridge, but now the stakes seemed higher than ever. They spent the afternoon briefing Cardinal Vieri on the timeline, the parchment's discovery, the initial tests, the infiltration attempts by the Circle of Serapis. He took copious notes in an embossed leather journal and asked pointed questions about lab procedures and chain of custody. Now and then he cast a worried glance at Father Benedict, who returned it with a respectful but guarded nod. Eventually, they all piled into vehicles to visit the government facility, where the manuscript was kept under guard. The dryness of the desert gave way to a dusty, sun-baked structure ringed by barbed wire. Inside, uniformed personnel escorted them to a sealed room. Miriam's heart thudded as she once again set eyes on the parchment. Cardinal Vieri donned gloves and gently lifted the edge of the protective covering. He murmured softly in Latin. Miriam guessed it was some form of prayer. Then, as he read the Greek script, his lips formed a thin line. He perused several lines before placing it back down with careful reverence. "I see," he said at last. "This text directly challenges the position of Jesus. It elevates John the Baptist in a manner entirely contradictory to official doctrine. Even if the authors were a fringe group, it is a disturbing notion. We must confirm absolutely the text's origin." Miriam explained the partial results so far, including the possibility of modern tampering. Vieri nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, we must remain open to all possibilities, fraud or authenticity." After the session, the parchment was locked away again. As they left, the cardinal took Benedict aside for a private conversation. Miriam watched them from a distance, noticing how Benedict's posture grew tense. She couldn't hear their exchange, but she suspected Vieri was reminding Benedict of his ecclesiastical vows, instructing him to protect the church from scandal. She waited, a swirl of uneasy thoughts in her head. When Benedict returned, he forced a smile. "He's concerned about the leak and the involvement of extremist groups. The church wants the text to remain here for now, away from any prying eyes." Miriam frowned. "But we need to continue analysis. Labs in Jerusalem. The cardinal will arrange for a Vatican-approved lab to do further tests," he said hesitantly. "He wants the final word to come from a place the church trusts." "But we also need neutral labs to confirm," Dr. Abud insisted. "We can't rely solely on a Vatican lab. That wouldn't satisfy the academic community." Benedict raised his hands in a calming gesture. "I told him as much. He said the church wouldn't object if Dr. Abud's lab in Jerusalem or recognized institutes in Europe run additional tests, provided they coordinate with the Vatican." Miriam let out a breath. "Well, that's something, as long as we're not stifled." They drove back to the outpost at dusk. The desert sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a stark contrast to the shadows of doubt and intrigue that seemed to swirl around the group. That evening, they hosted Cardinal Vieri for a modest dinner. While they ate, he recounted tales of historical controversies in the church: Galileo, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Gospel of Judas. His tone was even, but the underlying message was clear. Whenever a discovery threatened to undermine orthodoxy, the church took decisive measures. Miriam drifted off to bed that night with an uneasy feeling. She recalled how fervently the cardinal had studied the parchment's lines. There had been more than scholarly interest in his gaze. There was fear. The next day, Miriam, Father Benedict, Dr. Abud, and Cardinal Vieri planned to revisit the cave where the parchment was found. They wanted to see if any other artifacts might have been overlooked or if the rumored second parchment could be hidden somewhere. They set out in 2 jeeps at first light, accompanied by local guides and a small security detail. As they wound through the rocky terrain, the golden rays of the morning sun revealed the harsh beauty of the land. They arrived at the outcrop, the same place where Miriam and Benedict had first laid eyes on the parchment. The group split up to cover more ground. Cardinal Vieri and Father Benedict inspected the immediate cave area, while Dr. Abud and Miriam ventured deeper, following narrow crevices. Desert dust coated their boots. The dryness made every breath a raspy exhalation of hot air. After half an hour of careful searching, Dr. Abud called to Miriam. She made her way over to find him crouched in a small alcove, running his hand over the stone wall. A faint swirl of old charcoal markings could be seen, as if someone had once scrawled symbols. "Look," he whispered. "These markings, definitely ancient. Hard to say if they're from the same period as the scroll, but they might be a clue." Miriam used her flashlight to illuminate the fading symbols. One looked like a fish, another a stylized bird. She snapped photos. In certain strains of early Judeo-Christian iconography, The fish often symbolize Jesus, while the bird, or dove, might symbolize the Holy Spirit or John's baptism. But these symbols were so worn that it was difficult to be sure. She made a note to examine them more thoroughly later. They moved carefully, checking each possible niche or hidden passage. At one point, Miriam discovered a small, bricked-up recess. She knelt down, prying at the loose stones. Her pulse quickened. Could something else have been sealed inside? "Doctor, Aboud, hand me that trowel." He did so, and she carefully dislodged a chunk of mortar. After several minutes, she managed to remove enough stones to peer inside. Disappointment washed over her as her flashlight revealed nothing but cobwebs and cracked, empty space. She exhaled. Perhaps the rumors of a second scroll were just a bluff or a decoy. Still, a tension lingered in the air, like an electric charge. They spent another hour combing the cave system. Finally, the heat grew unbearable, and they regrouped at the entrance. Father Benedict shook his head as he approached, sweat beading on his forehead. "Nothing," he said. "No sign of a second parchment." Cardinal Vieri emerged behind him, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "We must remain diligent. If there is another document, we'll find it." They all stood there in silence. The desert wind rustled the sparse shrubs. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Miriam noticed a figure standing on a nearby rise, the silhouette of a person dressed in a hooded garment, arms folded. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. Then, as if sensing her gaze, the figure turned and disappeared behind the rocky outcropping. A chill ran down Miriam's spine despite the scorching heat. She nudged Father Benedict and pointed. He spotted nothing but swirling dust. Had she imagined it? Or was it one of those circle of Serapis zealots observing from a distance? Before they could investigate, the cardinal insisted they return to the vehicles and head back. They had spent enough time in the blazing sun for one day. That evening, tensions rose again. Cardinal Vieri announced that, with the consensus of Vatican officials, he would be transferring the parchment to Rome for further examination. Father Benedict stiffened. "I'm not sure that's wise," Benedict countered, voice trembling with a quiet urgency. "We've only done partial local testing. The Israeli Antiquities Authority and the scientific community will demand their own independent analyses. Removing the scroll from the country could cause an international incident." Vieri's expression hardened. "Nevertheless, the Church has a vested interest in the integrity of this artifact. Our labs are state-of-the-art, and we have specialists in paleography and patristics who can verify its authenticity beyond any doubt." Dr. Aboud joined in. "But if the artifact leaves, how can we complete the local analyses we've begun? This is a shared responsibility, Cardinal." Vieri's gaze swept the room. "The Holy See will ensure the results are shared promptly and transparently, but we must safeguard it. Already you've had infiltration attempts. This region is not stable enough." Miriam stood up from her chair. "With respect, Cardinal, our labs here are more than capable, and if there is a second scroll or other related artifacts, we need to cross-reference them with this one. Splitting them might hamper vital context." The Cardinal pursed his lips. "I empathize, Dr. Levy. But the decision is not mine alone. A formal request has been made to the Israeli government. The wheels are in motion. Rome wants this parchment under the Vatican's highest security." She realized with a sinking feeling that the Church's political clout was formidable. All her arguments might not suffice to keep the scroll in Israel. Father Benedict's silence spoke volumes. He was torn between loyalty to the Church and his commitment to academic integrity. "We'll see," Benedict finally said. "Dr. Aboud and I will speak with the authorities. For now, the parchment remains in the government facility. We still have a window to conduct more local tests." Vieri nodded curtly, but his expression indicated that, from his perspective, the matter was already decided. Late that night, Miriam woke to a commotion outside the outpost. She heard men shouting in Arabic. Heart hammering, she rushed out of her room, finding Father Benedict and Dr. Aboud already near the entrance. "What's going on?" she asked. "Security alarm at the government facility," Benedict replied, grabbing a coat. "They said there's been a break-in attempt." They hurriedly got into an SUV with Dr. Aboud driving at a reckless pace through the dark desert roads. Upon arriving at the compound, they found the gates guarded by a flurry of soldiers, some with drawn weapons. Lights were flashing, sirens wailing. They had to navigate 2 checkpoints before being allowed inside. A grim-faced official explained that 2 unidentified individuals had scaled the outer fence, possibly heading toward the storage area housing the parchment. Alarms had been triggered automatically. Guards rushed to intercept, but the intruders fled. As far as anyone could tell, they hadn't gained entry to the sealed vault. The parchment was safe. Relief swept Miriam, but also renewed anxiety. The circle of Serapis? Or perhaps some unscrupulous antiquities smugglers? Either way, forces wanted that parchment badly. They stepped into the vault room to confirm its safety. The steel container remained intact, seals unbroken. But on the floor, near a corner, Miriam noticed small footprints, as if someone had tracked dust in from outside. She crouched, shining a flashlight. A partial boot print. Possibly the intruders or one of the guards. Hard to say. The air inside was cold and still, the hum of climate control the only noise. Father Benedict exhaled. Whoever they are, they're desperate. This can't go on. They stayed at the facility until dawn, meeting with local officials, giving statements. Miriam's mind whirled. The attempt, though failed, was too close for comfort. She also worried it might bolster Cardinal Vieri's argument that the scroll should be moved to Rome. And indeed, by midday, the cardinal had arrived at the compound, citing the break-in as further evidence that local security was insufficient. Tensions flared. Dr. Aboud threatened to file an injunction to keep the parchment in Israel until the tests were complete. Miriam tried to mediate, while Father Benedict stood by, clearly torn. Finally, they reached a tentative compromise. The parchment would remain under Israeli control for another week, giving them time for further analysis. After that, the Vatican could petition for an international loan of the artifact. Cardinal Vieri departed in a swirl of official phone calls, presumably to speak with higher-ups in Rome. As the sun set on another tumultuous day, Miriam slumped in a chair at the outpost. Father Benedict placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This is becoming more political than scholarly," she said, voice quivering with fatigue. "I know," he replied, "but the truth will come out, one way or another. We just have to keep forging ahead, carefully. We have a week to gather all the evidence we can." Miriam nodded, thinking about how quickly time was slipping away. The entire world was watching, waiting, speculating. Meanwhile, the circle of Serapis lurked in the shadows, eager to sow chaos. And in the midst of it all, the question lingered. Was the parchment truly a genuine first-century testament of John's resentment toward Jesus? Or a sophisticated forgery designed to upend Christianity? She closed her eyes, imagining John the Baptist in the wilderness, a voice crying out, feeling overshadowed by the very man he'd once baptized. Could a few ancient lines of papyrus truly shift the faith of billions? The swirling unknowns weighed on her like the desert's stifling heat. Tomorrow they would press on. Further tests, deeper inquiries, more interviews with local Bedouins. But for now, Miriam allowed herself a moment of stillness. She listened to the desert wind, hoping it might carry some whisper of clarity in this storm of mystery and intrigue. Unbeknownst to her, far away in hidden corners of the internet, lines of code spun out by advanced AI systems were generating near-perfect imitations of ancient Greek texts, preparing to flood the world with a barrage of contradictory manuscripts. It was a race now, an arms race of truth versus deception, faith versus doubt, past versus future. And the final outcome remained painfully uncertain. Yet neither Miriam nor Father Benedict suspected just how explosive and surprising that outcome would be.